Your brain is addicted to pleasure, not just to drugs or alcohol, to the constant hits of dopamine you get from social media, junk food shopping, binge watching shows, and every other instant gratification your modern life provides. And this addiction is destroying your ability to do anything meaningful with your life. I'm not here to tell you that pleasure is bad or that you need to become a monk. I'm here because I realized that my brain had been hijacked by a system designed to keep me distracted, consuming, and mediocre. And until you understand how your pleasure addiction is controlling your decisions, you'll never build the life you actually want. 6 months ago, I did an experiment that changed everything about how I see success and failure. I tracked every single dopamine hit I was getting throughout the day: social media notifications, sugary snacks, online shopping, Netflix binges, mindless scrolling, everything that gave me that little rush of pleasure without requiring any real effort. What I discovered horrified me. I was getting dozens of pleasure hits every single day, and every single one of them was making it harder for me to do the difficult, important work that would actually improve my life. My brain had become so accustomed to instant rewards that anything requiring patience, focus, or delayed gratification felt unbearable. Here's what most people don't understand about how their brain works. Every time you get a hit of pleasure, whether it's from a like on Instagram, a bite of chocolate, or buying something online, your brain releases dopamine. This dopamine creates a pathway that says, do this again. The more you repeat these behaviors, the stronger these pathways become. But here's the problem: your brain has a limited capacity for dopamine. When you're constantly flooding it with cheap, easy pleasures, you're using up all your dopamine on things that don't matter. This leaves you with no motivation, no drive, and no ability to persist through the challenging work that would actually change your life. This is why you can spend hours scrolling through your phone but can't focus on reading a book for 20 minutes. This is why you can binge watch an entire season of a show but can't stick to a workout routine for a week. This is why you can spend money you don't have on things you don't need but can't invest in your education or your future. Your pleasure addiction isn't just making you lazy, it's rewiring your brain to crave the path of least resistance. You're literally training yourself to avoid anything that requires effort, patience, or delayed gratification. You're programming yourself for mediocrity. Let me paint you a picture of what your typical day probably looks like. You wake up and immediately check your phone, getting your first dopamine hit before you're even fully conscious. You scroll through social media while having your coffee, stacking pleasure on top of pleasure. You eat sugary breakfast food that spikes your blood sugar and gives you another rush. Throughout the day, you're constantly reaching for your phone, snacking on junk food, checking for notifications, buying things you don't need, and consuming entertainment. By the time evening comes, you're so overstimulated and depleted that all you can do is collapse in front of a screen and consume more content. Meanwhile, the important work, the exercise routine, the skill building, the creative projects, the difficult conversations, the planning for your future gets pushed aside because your brain is convinced that these activities aren't rewarding enough compared to the instant hits you're used to getting. But here's what changed everything for me. I realized that successful people aren't more disciplined than everyone else. They've just learned to get their dopamine from different sources. Instead of getting their rewards from consumption, they get their rewards from creation. Instead of seeking instant gratification, they've trained their brains to find pleasure in the process of building something meaningful. The difference between someone who achieves their goals and someone who stays stuck isn't willpower, it's where they've trained their brain to find satisfaction. High achievers have learned to get dopamine from progress, from learning, from overcoming challenges, from creating value. Average people get their dopamine from consuming, from being entertained, from avoiding discomfort. This is why some people can work on their goals for hours without getting bored, while others can't focus for 5 minutes. It's not that successful people have supernatural discipline, they've just rewired their brains to find the hard work rewarding instead of painful. Here's the truth that no one wants to hear. Every moment you choose instant pleasure over long-term progress, you're training your brain to stay mediocre. Every time you pick up your phone, instead of working on your goals, you're strengthening the neural pathways that keep you distracted. Every time you choose comfort over challenge, you're programming yourself for a life of unrealized potential. Your modern environment is designed to keep you addicted to pleasure. Social media companies hire neuroscientists to make their platforms as addictive as possible. Food companies engineer products to trigger cravings. Entertainment companies create content designed to keep you watching for hours. Shopping platforms use psychological tricks to make you buy things you don't need. You're not weak for falling into these patterns, you're human. But you are responsible for recognizing what's happening and choosing to do something about it. Because every day you stay trapped in these cycles, you're moving further away from the person you could become. The solution isn't to eliminate all pleasure from your life, it's to become intentional about where your pleasure comes from. You need to retrain your brain to find satisfaction in activities that actually move your life forward instead of just providing temporary escape. Here's how you start breaking free from pleasure addiction, and I want you to actually implement this, not just think about it. First, do a dopamine audit. For 1 week, write down every single thing you do that gives you immediate pleasure without requiring effort. Social media, junk food, shopping, entertainment, track it all. Second, implement what I call a dopamine fast. Choose 1 day per week where you eliminate all the cheap sources of dopamine you've identified. No social media, no junk food, no mindless entertainment, no unnecessary shopping. Notice how uncomfortable this feels and how often you reach for these activities without thinking. Third, start replacing your pleasure sources. Instead of getting dopamine from scrolling, get it from learning something new. Instead of getting it from junk food, get it from the feeling of completing a workout. Instead of getting it from buying things, get it from creating something or making progress on a goal. Fourth, make the good habits easier and the bad habits harder. Put your phone in another room when you're trying to focus. Remove junk food from your house. Cancel subscriptions to services that waste your time. Set up your environment to support the behaviors you want instead of the ones that feel good in the moment. But here's the most important part: you have to be patient with the process. Your brain has been conditioned to expect instant rewards, so anything that requires patience will feel boring or difficult at first. This is normal. This is your brain adjusting to a new way of operating. When you first start trying to focus on important work without constant stimulation, it will feel uncomfortable. When you first try to exercise instead of watching TV, it will feel like punishment. When you first try to learn something challenging instead of consuming entertainment, it will feel boring. This discomfort is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're retraining your brain. Every moment you push through this discomfort, you're creating new neural pathways that will make meaningful work feel more rewarding than mindless consumption. The goal isn't to become someone who never experiences pleasure. The goal is to become someone who gets their greatest pleasure from activities that actually improve their life. Instead of being addicted to consumption, you want to become addicted to creation. Instead of being addicted to comfort, you want to become addicted to growth. Think about the most successful people you know or admire. They're not miserable people depriving themselves of joy. They're people who have found deep satisfaction in the process of building, creating, learning, and contributing. They've trained their brains to find the challenging work rewarding instead of painful. This is available to you too, but only if you're willing to go through the uncomfortable period of retraining your brain. Most people aren't willing to do this because the immediate discomfort feels worse than the long-term mediocrity. They choose the familiar pleasure addiction over the unfamiliar satisfaction of meaningful work. But here's what happens when you successfully make this shift. Life becomes infinitely more interesting. Instead of constantly seeking external stimulation to feel good, you start generating your own satisfaction through the work you're doing. Instead of needing constant entertainment, you become the person creating things worth paying attention to. Your energy levels stabilize because you're not riding the roller coaster of artificial highs and crashes. Your focus improves because your brain isn't constantly scanning for the next quick fix. Your confidence grows because you're actually accomplishing things instead of just consuming other people's accomplishments. Most importantly, you start making progress on the things that actually matter to you. The goals you've been putting off become achievable because your brain is no longer sabotaging your efforts with constant cravings for instant gratification. The people around you will notice this change before you do. They'll comment on how focused you seem, how much you're getting done, how different your energy feels. This isn't because you've become a different person, it's because you've stopped letting your pleasure addiction control your behavior. Here's what I want you to understand about this process. It's not about becoming perfect or eliminating all pleasure from your life. It's about becoming conscious of how your brain seeks reward and choosing to direct that seeking toward activities that compound over time instead of activities that just provide temporary relief. You can still enjoy entertainment, social media, and treats, but you enjoy them as conscious choices rather than unconscious habits. You use them as rewards for meaningful work rather than as escape from meaningful work. You control when and how much you consume rather than letting the consumption control you. The difference between successful people and everyone else isn't that successful people don't like pleasure, it's that they've learned to get their pleasure from the right sources. They get more satisfaction from completing a challenging project than from watching someone else's project on TV. They get more pleasure from learning a new skill than from scrolling through random information online. This shift doesn't happen overnight, and it's not always comfortable. There will be moments when focusing on important work feels impossible because your brain is screaming for stimulation. There will be times when you choose the instant gratification over the long-term goal. This is part of the process, not a failure. What matters is that you recognize what's happening and get back on track instead of giving up entirely. Every time you choose meaningful work over mindless consumption, you're strengthening the neural pathways that will make this choice easier in the future. Your brain is currently addicted to pleasure, but that addiction is not permanent. You created these patterns and you can change them. You trained your brain to crave instant gratification, and you can retrain it to crave meaningful progress. The question isn't whether you can break free from pleasure addiction, the question is whether you will. Your future self is waiting to see what you choose, and every decision you make today is programming the person you'll become tomorrow. Stop letting your pleasure addiction steal your potential. Start training your brain to find satisfaction in the work that matters. Your life is waiting for you on the other side of this discomfort.